Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. NATO has a new boss. Mr. Mark Rutte, former Dutch Prime Minister, takes over from Jens Stoltenberg. He's got his hands full, though, Mr. Rutte, with what's going on in Russia and Russia's aggression in Ukraine and in other countries around the world, and the possibility that Mr. Donald Trump might be elected US president, and who is considered by many to be a NATO skeptic. Well, what does this all mean for NATO? Where could we go from here? Well, to answer those questions, we're joined by Gary Tabach, former Chief of Staff and NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow, regular guest on TVP World. Gary, great to see you. Welcome back.
Always good to see you, Hashim. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure, sir. So Mr. Rutte, what do you make of him, and how different is he in terms of his approach to the leadership position from Jens Stoltenberg?
Well, I can't tell. We'll have to wait and see. But from what I know and from what I hear from my friends at NATO, they're not expecting much change. He's what you call as an old Europe. And in his tenure as a prime minister, Dutch prime minister, he had the policy, again, of open borders, immigration. He's a very, as you say, staunch fighter for LGBT community. And this is what he criticized Russia mostly for, not attacking Ukraine, but not protecting your rights and so forth. So again, it's honestly, in my personal opinion, it's an old European leader, and I was hoping for somebody from New Europe, maybe somebody from Poland to head NATO. Granted, in the last 20, 30 years, many Eastern European countries that have joined NATO and paying their part is what President Trump is criticized for, is that he's demanding that everybody pay their part of being part of the club. But many old European countries are not pulling their own weight. Yet the Eastern European countries, such as Poland, do.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, the requirement, of course, is 2% of GDP should be spent on defence amongst NATO members. And as you say, you know, Poland is certainly doing its part in that, and so are other countries in the region. So more of the same, you think, Gary. What does that mean in terms of NATO's response to the Russian threat? So further consolidation, for example, of a strategy of the military to protect NATO borders, or something else? Well,
I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell the future, but things, again, will depend largely on who's going to be our next president. And if you have a weak leader, we can see that NATO is really dysfunctional. And when you have a strong leader, NATO does take some sort of action. But again, speaking of action, when I was part of NATO and I held two jobs that were kind of senior jobs in NATO, again, we have to remember that NATO is not just a military alliance, it's a political military alliance. Most of it depends on politics. And most of it depends on the U.S. politics. And we used to say NATO does not stand for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but actually NATO stands for No Action, Talk Only. We have to look back. What has NATO prevented, and what has NATO resolved in the last 20, 30 years? Not much. Not even joining together with the United States after its 9/11 attack. And we can see that under the current administration of the United States, NATO was left behind in Afghanistan when the American forces just took off in one day without warning, without preparation, leaving all the armaments to the Taliban. And it took Boris Johnson 36 hours to reach the White House to find out what the hell is going on. So this is not a very functional NATO. Again, of course, Mr. Rutte, he's inheriting a monstrosity of 32 countries. Some of them have really nothing in common with each other. For example, Poland and Turkey. And we know that recently at the United Nations, Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, addressed the United Nations criticizing NATO, saying that, you know, he may get out of NATO or NATO is not serving its purpose. That there is a lot of discontent or disconnection about Israel, which is considered to be a close ally of NATO, where some of the countries are not supporting Israel. And again, I personally don't see much help that NATO has provided to Ukraine, not the help that it needs to provide, where President Trump criticizing European countries in NATO, saying, hey, it's in your backyard that the World War III is starting up, and you're not really doing much about it. A lot of talk, saying no action, talk only, but Ukraine still is almost 3 years, is getting very, very little military assistance.
Right. So if President Trump were to come into power in the United States, Gary, do you think NATO would have more focused direction?
Well, what he's saying is that he will demand that it would not be 2%, but would be 3% of GDP that the country spend on their defense. So he's a strong proponent of peace through strength. He mentions it almost at all of his addresses and all of his rallies. So as we remember, and you mentioned it, he did say that people who are not going to, the countries who are not, and he was addressing Germany, he was really addressing and looking at Madam Merkel at the time, saying, if you're not going to pay your share, we're not going to defend you. And as a matter of fact, I will invite Putin to go ahead and take care of you in that sense. So at that time, he was criticized for a great deal, except Stoltenberg shook his hand and said, thank you. They're starting paying more and start paying their share. So in a sense, it's kind of a childhood reverse psychology, sort of, when he acts tough or when he says we all pull weight together or not. You can't expect us to defend you at our expense with our lives while you building a northern stream with Putin, whom you expect us to protect you from, while you're going to making billions and billions of dollars. Right. So he was very clear about it. So I hope if he does become a president, that he would be tough with NATO. He would demand that NATO pay its share, maybe higher. And Mr. Rutte is also saying that he expects 2.5% of GDP, because 2% is not enough for NATO to function. So we'll see, but hopefully he will bring NATO together, which is very, very difficult. Again, it's 32 countries. Each country has its own agenda. Each country has a right to veto any decision, which is difficult, of course, for them to find, all common ground. And it became a very bureaucratic, huge monstrosity that is going to be difficult to control or to mark direction. So we'll see. We'll see how if anybody, he'll probably be able to do it.
Right. Well, as you say, Gary, we will see so many pieces of the jigsaw there. And yeah, we shall see how things unfold. But meantime, as always, Gary, thank you so much for sharing your analysis, and come back soon. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, as always, lots more coming up.